Good morning, friends. My name is Ben Johnson, lead pastor of St Mary's Anglican Church in Merbau North. If you haven't already done so, press pause on this video and read the story of Joseph, which can be found in Genesis chapter 41. And the verse that we're reading, or verses that we're reading this morning, is verses 22 through to verse 40. But we're actually focusing on the story of Joseph as it's found right through from chapter 37 through to chapter 41, because Joseph's story is a long story. So you might like to even read all of that. For today's theme that we're exploring is the theme of kingdom, and how Joseph is given responsibility to represent not just Pharaoh, but Yahweh and Yahweh's kingdom. Because we are beginning our series on covenant and kingdom, and last week we explored the theme of covenant with the story of Abraham, and today it is the story of Joseph and the theme of kingdom. And we find that actually right back in chapter 37, we find Joseph as a young man. He's the youngest of Jacob's 11 sons, and he's the favoured son. And we know that he's the favoured son because he's been given this ornamental coat, a coat of long sleeves, and it's a coat not of a worker, but of a supervisor. It's a coat that's not fit for menial tasks, but of standing around and being important. And all of this attention goes to Joseph's head. And when Joseph receives a dream from Yahweh, we find that he has revelation, but not the wisdom for interpretation. And this is really important. For revelation always needs interpretation. And so as Joseph interprets this dream himself without the wisdom for correct interpretation, he comes to the wrong conclusion. Kind of. I mean, he sees correctly that one day his brothers will bow down to him, but he actually thinks that this dream means that it's all about him. That he is at the center of the universe. And we find that as God takes Joseph, God strips Joseph away so that Joseph can displace him outside of the center of his universe and allow God to be in at the center. And so what do his brothers do? Due to Joseph's arrogance, they do the only correct thing that brothers would do. They sell him into slavery to Hagar's descendants, the Ishmaelites. And we find that Joseph makes his way to Egypt as a slave. And if we jump into Genesis chapter 39, we find that God is there with Joseph in Egypt. God causes Joseph to prosper. For God wants Joseph to prosper. But prosperity isn't just about money and wealth. No, we actually find here that when we're talking about prosperity, we're actually talking about God's grace and his favor being upon Joseph. And as we talk about Joseph prospering, we actually learn that as God wants Joseph to prosper, this prosperity isn't for Joseph's benefit, but for the benefit of others. Blessed to be a blessing. For this is the way that prosperity always works. Blessed to be a blessing. But there's still some work to be done. We find there in chapter 39 the story of Potiphar's wife, and she tries to seduce Joseph, and Joseph does the only thing that he can do in the face of temptation. He flees. But he's captured and he's thrown into prison, and so his situation goes from worse to worse. But even in prison, at the end of the tether, Joseph still prospers because God's hand is upon him. Well, we can jump into chapter 40 from here. Joseph is still in prison. God is here with him again. And we find that soon he is in charge of the entire prison, and 11 years fly by. This is a long story as God slowly molds Joseph into the person that he's calling him to be. And we find that after 11 years, the cupbearer and the baker, the person who would bake the food or make the food, and the person who would bring the food and test the food to make sure that the Pharaoh does not get sick and he's not being poisoned, are both thrown in prison. So we can assume that the Pharaoh's had a bout of gastro or something. And we find that there's 2 more dreams here. 2 more dreams. And Joseph interprets their dreams, saying to them that in just a short while, the cupbearer will be reinstated while the baker will be executed. And we find that this comes to fruition and the cupbearer returns to his post. And yet he forgets about Joseph for another 2 years. And it's not until 2 years later that Pharaoh has this dream that we've read in the opening of our time together in chapter 41, that the cupbearer remembers Joseph. The cupbearer remembers Joseph, and he says to Pharaoh, Pharaoh, I know somebody who can interpret the dream. And here's the thing, as Joseph is brought before Pharaoh, we see a radical shift within Joseph's life. He finally gets it, my friends. I cannot do it, he says. Only God can do it. You see, as God has been at work within Joseph's life, stripping all away, Joseph has learnt that he is not at the center of his own universe, that actually God is at the center of Joseph's universe, and that only he can provide the correct interpretation for the revelation that Pharaoh has received. And as Joseph moves to the edge of his own universe, allowing God to be at the center, God is able to use him to represent Yahweh and his kingdom. For this is the way of the way God works within our world, when we surrender and submit to the heavenly King. He gives authority and power to represent his kingdom. Well, friends, as you think about this, I'd encourage you to consider, where has God been working in your own life? Molding you and shaping you into the person that he's slowly calling you to be, helping you displace yourself from the center of your own universe, allowing God to stand there. Submission and surrender to the heavenly King. And through that comes authority and power to represent the kingdom. That is the story of the gospel. That is the story of the way kingdom works through the gospel of grace and the good news of Jesus Christ. This today has been just a short teaching session on this theme, an idea of kingdom. Last week we explored the idea of covenant or of relationship. If kingdom is responsibility, covenant is relationship. And from now on, we're going to find that these themes, they're not disconnected themes. They're not 2 separate themes, but actually they are one theme. Covenant and kingdom, relationship and responsibility. That is the way God works as he calls each and every one of us into relationship with him, finding our identity in him, and also into responsibility to represent him and his kingdom with authority and power. But that only comes, my friends, through submission and surrender. Have a wonderful week, and I look forward to joining with you next week as we explore these themes through the story of Moses and how we find both covenant and kingdom, relationship and responsibility in this story of Moses and God's people. Have a wonderful week. Thanks.